Have you ever had a boss who made a point of belittling you in front of everyone? I'm talking about that kind of boss who seems to take pleasure in humiliating you, who corrects in public, who raises his voice, who looks like you're incompetent, even when you're delivering more than the rest of the team. And the worst, no one does anything. Everyone sees it, but pretends not to see it. If this has ever happened to you, let me tell you something. This toxic culture in the workplace is more common than we think. Authoritarian, abusive, manipulative bosses who love to impose themselves through fear, who use their position as a shield to humiliate, shout, and demoralize those below. People who confuse leadership with oppression. And maybe you're going through just that right now. Maybe you wake up with an upset stomach before you go to work. Maybe you spend the day holding yourself back so you don't explode. Maybe you've swallowed hard so many times that you don't even taste your own dignity anymore. Do you know what the problem is? Most people believe they have nothing to do. They think that either you accept quietly or loses his job. But what I'm going to show you in this video is something else. There is a way to turn this game around, to be respected without shouting, to impose himself without clashing head-on, and to make a toxic boss realize that he no longer has power over you. And no, it's not cheap motivational talk. It's a real strategy which I applied step by step, and that it worked in just 3 days. Before discovering this technique, I had already lost nights of sleep trying to understand why it happened to me. I thought, am I the problem? Am I exaggerating? But no, the problem was in the environment, and mainly in the way I reacted to his behavior. Toxic bosses smell fear. They identify who is emotionally fragile, who is afraid of losing their job, who swallows one's pride in silence, and that's where they move forward. They test their limit every day to see how far they can go. If you show weakness, they overpower you. If you show anger, they provoke you even more. Now, when you change your posture strategically, when you understand the psychological game behind these humiliations, respect begins to emerge. And the most incredible, without having to butt heads, without having to argue. You don't have to raise your voice. No need to shout. You don't need to hit the table. You just need to understand how to make your presence communicate strength. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you here. But let me ask you one more question. How many times have you swallowed humiliation at work just to keep your job? How many times have you left the company wanting to disappear from the world because you felt you had no value in there? That's why this video is so important. Because while you watch, there is someone being treated like garbage by a leader who has never read a book about empathy. There are people suffering in silence, thinking that they need to accept this as part of professional life. But I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be this way. Today, I want to open a code that almost no one talks about, a technique that seems forbidden because it completely changes the dynamic between you and the toxic boss. It's as if you turn the key from submission to respect without having to become anyone's enemy. But pay attention. This technique is not magic. It requires attention, consistency, and above all, emotional intelligence. I'm not going to teach you how to confront. I'll show you how to shield yourself psychologically and use strategic signals of quiet authority until the other person realizes that you're no longer an easy target. And before you think, but with me it's different, let me tell you, I thought that too, until I tested it. And on the 3rd day, the same boss who shouted at me in front of the team, he called me to talk in the private room. The tone respectful, the look surprised. He realized that something had changed and he was no longer in control. And that's what I want you to experience. It's not about getting revenge. It's not about winning. It's about protecting yourself. It's about regaining the respect they took away from you. So if you've ever been humiliated at work, if you feel that your boss sees you as someone weak, manipulable, disposable, you need to see what's coming next. Because I'm going to show you, step by step, the forbidden technique that I used to turn this game around in 3 days. And you can start today. Do you know why a toxic boss keeps disrespecting you? because he thinks he can. Because at some point you have passed a signal, perhaps without realizing it, that he has power over you. And that for this type of person is like lighting a green light for humiliation, manipulation, and abuse. The truth that no one tells you is that toxic bosses operate as emotional predators. They don't yell at everyone. They don't treat anyone with contempt. They choose, they analyze who they are going to target. And the target is usually the one who doesn't show internal authority, the one who apologizes too much, who lowers his head quickly, who smiles trying to avoid conflict, who accepts absurd tasks just so as not to seem difficult to deal with. It's not what you talk about. It's about how you behave. And look, I know it hurts to hear that, because many times we try to be polite, respectful, kind. And this ends up being interpreted as weakness in a competitive, toxic, and emotionally poorly structured professional environment. But the toxic boss doesn't respect kindness. He respects invisible barriers. He respects those who communicate, even without saying a word, that they know their own worth. There's a deep psychological truth behind this. People treat you based on the limit you set, or the absence of it. In the workplace, this translates into small attitudes. When you accept being interrupted all the time, when you don't question unfair decisions, when you work overtime without complaining, when you swallow one's pride smiling, all of this builds an image that the toxic boss interprets in the worst possible way. I can pressure him not to react. And from there it tests you a little bit a day to the point where your self-confidence starts to melt without you realizing it. And you know what's worse? Sometimes he does it in front of others, because he knows that if he weakens you publicly, he isolates you emotionally from the team. It creates a territory of fear, and in this territory, he reigns supreme. That's where the crooked looks, the uncomfortable silences in meetings, the hallway gossip begin. And when you see it, you're living in a toxic work environment where everything turns against you, without you having done anything wrong. But let's be real. It's hard to tell when this is happening. We normalize. He thinks it's just a phase, that maybe it's something in our heads. And that's exactly where the danger lies, because the longer you allow this cycle, the harder it is to break it. Respect at work is not something you ask for. It is something that you build with silent attitudes, with a firm posture, and with a presence that makes it clear. Not with me, no. I remember perfectly the moment I realized that. It was during a meeting. My boss had already made those acid jokes about my work a few times, always in jest, but you could feel the poison behind it. That day, he did it again. Only this time, I didn't laugh. I didn't confront it either. I just looked him in the eye with a neutral, confident expression and went back to writing down what he said, as if it didn't have the slightest emotional impact on me. It froze. Do you know why? Because the answer he expected, submission, uncomfortable laughter, justification, didn't come. And that, for a toxic boss, is disconcerting, because he realizes that he has lost emotional control over you. Bosses like this don't know how to deal with limits. They need you to be emotionally accessible, reactive, vulnerable. When you stop being predictable, when you start behaving with strategic neutrality, you dismantle his game. That's why many of them change targets, because respect does not come from fighting. Respect comes from the way you position yourself. And here comes something crucial. There is no point in feigning trust. You need to feel that trust internally. And that starts with how you see yourself. If you think you need to work twice as hard to get noticed, if you're always trying to prove your worth all the time, if you depend on the recognition of a boss who only knows how to criticize, so you are always operating in professional need mode, and toxic bosses sniff out lack like sharks sniff blood. You need to get out of this cycle. You need to build a posture that communicates, I don't need to prove anything to you. I'm here because I deserve it. I deliver. I respect it. And I expect the same. This is not arrogance, it's emotional maturity, it's positioning intelligence. It is what differentiates someone who is humiliated from someone who is respected, even in hostile environments. Now let's talk about something that few have the courage to say. There are toxic bosses who use their insecurity against you. He notices when you are not clear about your role, when you don't know how to say no assertively, when you don't know how to protect yourself from everyday microaggressions. It overwhelms you, interrupts you, makes you invisible, and little by little, it undermines their self-esteem. You know that kind of leader who praises others and ignores you, who schedules a meeting at the last minute with just you, who makes fun of his speeches in meetings. This is tactics. It's a disguised way of creating submission. And if you don't understand this game, you get into it. You start to sabotage yourself, to doubt yourself, to accept the unacceptable. And when you realize it, you have already lost the shine, the motivation, the joy of working. But calm down. Because if you've made it this far, that's already a sign that you're awakening. You are beginning to see that you do not have to accept this role, that there is a way to position yourself without becoming aggressive, that there is a type of presence that commands respect without having to raise your voice. I'll show you what this is in practice. What I learned, after many mistakes, is that you need to invert the logic of the relationship. Instead of seeking acceptance, you begin to show stability. Instead of trying to please, you show limits. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond with strategic neutrality. That's it. Changes everything, because respect is born when you stop trying to be accepted and begins to behave like someone who no longer needs to ask permission to exist in that space. And this is where the technique that I call forbidden comes in. Not because it is illegal, but because it breaks the invisible rules of emotional submission. In the next block, I'll show you how this technique works, how it works in the mind of a toxic boss, and how to apply it in the next 3 days without arousing suspicion. And yes, seeing the first signs of respect appear almost naturally. So pay attention, because now the real game begins. Now that you understand the psychological game behind toxic boss behavior, it's time to reveal what I call the forbidden technique. And yes, this name is not just to attract attention. It's because when you apply, it seems that you are breaking an invisible rule that many people in the workplace unconsciously follow, that of being silent, of submitting, of accepting. But this technique has the power to reprogram how people see you, including your boss. And the most surprising, it works in silence. It doesn't require fighting, it doesn't require confrontation, and you can start applying it now without anyone noticing. In my case, I started applying this technique at a time when I was emotionally drained. And maybe you are too, tired of being disrespected, ignored, diminished, treated as invisible. But instead of exploding or walking away, I decided to change my posture from the inside out. And it started with a simple attitude: silence. On the first day, the temptation to react was enormous. There was a moment when he, as always, tried to expose me in front of the team. He threw an indirect, questioned my delivery, and expected that standard reaction, explanations, justifications, maybe even a nervous smile. But I didn't give it to him. I just looked firm, direct, and remained silent. I didn't lower my head, I didn't look away. And I went back to looking at my papers as if that provocation had no relevance to me. He ignored it. He pretended he didn't care. He kept talking, but I felt it. He wasn't comfortable, because the game he knew, it was no longer working. And why does it work? Because silence, when it comes from someone who was previously reactive, deeply bothers those who need emotional control over the other. Toxic bosses feed on your reaction. When you take that away, you take away the fuel of abuse. It's almost like turning a mirror for him and making him see himself, even if only for a few seconds. On the second day, I continued with the same posture, but I went further. The moment he tried to overload me with an absurd task. In the midst of several other pending issues, I responded with something I had never said before. Noted, as soon as I finish the delivery you ordered yesterday, I'll take over that too. Is that it? No anger, no irony, no submission, just organization. And there, in that sentence, I left a subtle limit, a clear message. My time has value. It's not about shouting no. It's about placing your space smartly. That same day, I noticed the change. He started to measure his words more. He began to speak to me in a more neutral tone. And the most interesting thing, he started to talk to me less. That's because toxic bosses also know how to identify when someone is starting to get out of the position of easy target. They sense when you're repositioning. And then came the third day. That day, I arrived at work with a different attitude, not physical, but mental. I knew what I was doing. I knew I was influencing the environment in a subtle way. And I knew that there I had control of what emanated, even if he still had the position of power. And then something happened that I had never experienced there. He called me to talk, but not in a demanding tone. He asked for my opinion on a project. He asked me how I evaluated the team's progress, and for the first time, he treated me like someone respected. And look, it may seem like a miracle, but it is not. This is construction. This is strategy. And to make everything clearer, let me break down this technique into the 3 pillars that made a difference for me, and that can make a difference for you too, if applied consciously and consistently. The first pillar is what I call the silent posture. It is not to be silent forever. It is to use silence as a tool of power. When you stop justifying yourself for everything, when you leave the other without an immediate emotional response, they are forced to look at themselves, to reflect, realizing that he lost the control he thought he had. This is not passivity, it is emotional intelligence in action. And manipulative bosses hate to lose that kind of control. Use this to your advantage. The second pillar is what I call the subtle limit, and it appears in the small answers, at times that you respect, in the breaks you take, in the not now said politely, in the I'll check and get back to you that avoids hasty decisions. When you position yourself calmly, without apologizing for existing, people begin to see you as someone difficult to manipulate. And that's gold in toxic environments. And the third pillar is the most powerful, the strategic attitude towards third parties. Pay attention to this. Toxic bosses change their behavior when they realize that other people respect you. Therefore, on the third day, in addition to maintaining my posture and limits, I started to interact more with influential people on the team. Without flattery, only with presence, giving helpful suggestions, actively participating, creating connection. The result? I stopped being seen as the easy target and started to be seen as someone who contributes and gets noticed. And that completely changed the way he positioned himself with me, because now he knew I had allies. And whoever tries to humiliate someone with allies gets burned alone. These 3 steps, posture, limit, and strategic influence, seem simple, but they have an absurd power when applied together. It is like an invisible gear that begins to rotate, little by little, until it reverses the direction of the entire environment around it. And yes, this requires presence, attention, and a high dose of self-control. But it is totally possible. If you apply it exactly as I did, naturally, without forcing, without confronting, you'll see signs of change in the first few days. Maybe in the second, maybe in the third, or even the first, depending on your boss. But one thing is certain. The way you see yourself and behave will directly impact the way you are treated. By the way, tell me here in the comments, have you ever tried to position yourself differently and felt a change in the environment? Put down here just one word that represents how you felt in that situation. It can be invisible, swallowed, alive, strong, in shock. Choose yours. I read them all. And if you have never taken a stand, you comment, Enough. Now it's different. This simple comment can be the first step in your turnaround. We will still go deeper. There are important details you need to know to keep this change happening and avoid the mistakes that make everything go back to normal. So stay here with me, because the next step may be the most powerful of all. And here comes the question that everyone asks me when they hear this technique. Maybe you're thinking exactly that right now, but what if I get fired if I start imposing myself? It seems like a simple question, but it carries a deep fear. And this fear, more often than not, is what keeps many people trapped in a cycle of abuse and disrespect for years. The fear of being fired is so paralyzing that in many cases, people prefer to accept a toxic environment, accept being mistreated, ignored, sabotaged, just so I don't run the risk of losing my job. But here's a truth that may hurt to hear. If your boss already humiliates you today, you're already at risk. Yes, what I'm going to tell you now may seem harsh, but it's liberating. Whoever disrespects you will eventually discard you, because for a toxic boss, disrespect is a test. He pushes you little by little to see how far you can take it. And when you can't take it anymore, when your performance starts to drop due to emotional exhaustion, it labels you as problematic, unmotivated, weak, unstable. So guess what? He fires you, or worse, it suffocates you until you ask to leave. All this with the narrative that you didn't adapt. In other words, the fear that holds you back today does not protect you. It brings you closer to the end. Now think with me, if you are already in this kind of environment, where respect does not exist, where you are invisible, or worse, are seen as an easy target, the risk is already there. The difference is that now you will start acting intelligently. You will leave the position of silent victim and move to the position of professional with posture. And I need you to understand this clearly. Imposing yourself is not shouting. It is not clashing. It is not creating conflict. Imposing yourself is communicating with attitudes that you know your value. And when you do it with balance, with emotional intelligence, with strategy, you don't attract punishment, you attract respect. Do you know what really scares a manipulative boss? It's not the scream, it's calm. It's not the confrontation, it is firmness. It is not rebellion, it's consistency. When he realizes that he no longer affects you as before, that you no longer respond in the same emotional frequency, he disarms himself. And more than that, he begins to see you as someone who does not depend on his approval to exist. And that changes everything. Of course, not every toxic boss will accept this change right away. Some will find it strange. Others will test their limits one last time, as if to say, is it really true? Will this new posture last? But that's where you need to stand your ground, because respect is not earned in an act, it is built in constancy. And I understand. You may be thinking, but I don't have a profile to impose on myself. I'm quieter, more reserved. Even better, because this technique doesn't require you to change your essence. You don't have to become someone who is expansive, talkative, dominant. What you need is to stop giving in where you shouldn't. It is to show in silence that there is a limit, that their education is not synonymous with passivity, that you can be kind, but you are not naive, that you can collaborate, but you don't accept being unfairly burdened. And this goes for any type of professional environment, from the corporate office to public sectors, startups, family businesses. Wherever there are human relationships, there is also an invisible power game. And you need to learn how to play, with ethics, with elegance, with strategy. Because if you don't play, someone plays against you. Now, another common thought that holds many people back is, what if my boss is vindictive? What if he starts chasing me after he realizes I'm changing? This is a real concern, and I'll tell you this. The best way to disarm this type of boss is not to confront them directly, but to create an invisible shield around their reputation. When you start to interact better with the right colleagues, when you participate more actively in constructive discussions, when you contribute visibly and strategically. The toxic boss realizes that you are gaining social territory within the company, and that puts a brake on it. Bosses like this are masters at manipulating, but they don't attack when they know they're being watched. Therefore, the best defense is positive exposure. Not the forced kind, which looks like flattery, but the firm, professional, mature kind. And that's why the third step of the forbidden technique, which I talked about earlier, is so important. The way you behave in front of third parties completely changes the way the boss treats you, because now he realizes that any abusive movement can be noticed by more people. And for a toxic boss to be unmasked, it's the worst nightmare. And I know you might be wondering, but what if none of this works? What if, even imposing me, he continues to treat me badly? The answer here is also harsh but liberating. Maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe the environment is too rotten to be transformed. And if that's the case, that's okay too. Because now at least you know who you are. You learn to protect yourself. You learn to position yourself. And when you decide to leave, you'll leave with your head held high and with a new standard of respect set within you. But until then, you need to keep going. You need to apply. You must resist the temptation to go back to the old way, because it is exactly at this stage that most people give up. The moment they start to see the first reactions of the boss, they are insecure. They think they have done something wrong and go back to the submission cycle. And then everything goes back to the way it was before. Therefore, maintain constancy. Transformation doesn't happen when you get it right once. It happens when you maintain your new posture, even when you are insecure. And here's a powerful thing. When you learn to take a stand without fear, the resignation is no longer a ghost. Because now, if it happens, it's no longer a punishment. It's a liberation. And if it doesn't happen, even better. You've transformed the environment without losing its essence. You have won the invisible game without playing dirty. You have stepped out of the target position and taken the place of the protagonist. Tell me here in the comments, have you ever felt stuck at work for fear of losing your job? Have you ever wanted to impose yourself but backed off because you didn't know how the boss would react? Comment on just one word that defines this moment for you. It can be pressure, dread, doubt, guilt, anger, or he writes there, I no longer accept being a hostage. This phrase can be your first step to taking control of your professional history. And if you're feeling that now is the time, stay with me, because what I'm going to show you next is how to shield this new posture, how to maintain that strength, even when they try to test you. The next step is crucial for you not to back down, and I'll give it to you now. This is where most people get stuck. When he finally realizes that change is in his own hands, that the respect he seeks will not come from outside, neither by magic, nor by pity, nor by luck. It will come from your way of positioning yourself, your constancy, your emotional intelligence, because true respect is not required. It is built in silence, but with strategy. You don't have to scream. You don't need to hit the table. You don't have to deflect every attack. By the way, who needs to raise their tone all the time to be heard? It has already lost a long time ago. Those who win in the workplace, especially in toxic contexts with abusive leaders, saboteurs, and power games, are those who learn to maintain their own axis, even when everything around them is trying to destabilize. And here's something that few people realize. When you impose yourself aggressively, the environment rejects you. But when you position yourself firmly and intelligently, the environment begins to respect you naturally. People change the way they talk to you. The boss changes his tone. Even colleagues who once seemed indifferent begin to observe you with different eyes, because your energy has changed, because his presence has changed, and because from the moment you respect yourself, others are also obliged to respect you. And this is not about pride. It's about professional dignity. It's about no longer accepting being treated as invisible, as submissive, as someone who is always one step behind. Enough of that. No more accepting crumbs. No more swallowing humiliation as if it were part of your salary. You are not in this world to be pleased by everyone, but you were not born to be disrespected by anyone either, especially by those who should be a leader, by those who have a position of responsibility and use this to diminish others. These toxic bosses need to be disarmed, and it's not screaming back, it's behaving in a way that they can no longer manipulate. You may be wondering, but can I maintain this posture all the time? What if I fall again? Look, it can happen, because we are human, because not every day we are well. But what changes the game isn't perfection, it's consistency. It's you fall one day but get up the next and continue with the same mentality. It's you noticing when you've slipped and adjusting course. Respect is built exactly like this, in your ability to maintain a new frequency, even when the world tries to pull you back to the old frequency. And do you know what is the most powerful detail of all this? The changes you start to cause in the environment. When you change your posture, don't stop there. They begin to spread. There are people on your side who also suffer from the same boss, with the same toxic climate, but never had the courage to react. When this person sees you repositioning yourself, they see that it is possible. And without realizing it, you become a reference. You become the one who showed, without shouting, that you can be respected without ceasing to be you. And you can trust it. The environment understands. HR notices. The highest leadership notices. Even those who never said good morning to you start watching you, because the presence of someone who knows their own worth bothers those who play dirty and inspires those who are lost. And if you apply everything we've talked about so far, I have no doubt that you'll see the results. Perhaps little by little, perhaps in a subtle way at first, but you will feel it. You will notice that the climate changes, that the boss starts to mince words, that colleagues avoid certain jokes, that even your productivity improves, because your mind is lighter, more protected, and that's exactly why you can't stop here. This journey of internal transformation needs to continue. Now that you understand that respect is built with strategy, it's time to learn how to shield your emotions, because the truth is that after you change your posture, some people will test you. They will try to provoke you in other ways. They'll try to pull you back to the old way, and you need to be ready to keep the new version of yourself alive, steadfast, unshakable. So I'm going to ask you something. If you've made it this far, it's because this content really touched you. So leave your like on this video now. This helps the channel a lot to grow and shows me that this content needs to continue reaching more people. Subscribe to the channel now, because this is the place where you learn every week how to protect yourself from toxic environments, how to stand up strongly, and how to keep your emotional health intact even when everything seems to push you down. Oh, and comment below too. I really want to hear from you. Tell me, what was the worst situation you ever went through with a toxic boss? You can let off steam. This space is safe. If he doesn't want to go into details, he just comments, "Now I respect myself." This phrase is powerful because it marks your commitment to this new posture. It marks that you will no longer accept being held hostage by anyone. And of course, watch the next video that's appearing here on the screen right now. It's the perfect complement to that content. In it, I'll show you how to really shield your emotional, even when you're surrounded by saboteurs, people who try to bring you down out of envy, insecurity, or fear of your growth. This is the next step in your journey, and it starts now. Click on the video on the side and come with me.